I'd like to go ahead and review the comment section from our last video. I'm going to attempt to take on a very big question written by Invicto Spiritus here. He says, big question here. Are Gnostics considered Luciferians? I've watched several videos that suggest that we are. But then I've also seen videos that suggest Luciferians engage in gruesome and cruel rituals, which I want no part of. I'm specifically referring to groups like the Freemasons, Knights Templar, and Illuminati. Some people view them as evil and others as enlightened opponents to the Orthodox Church. So I just wanted your 2 cents on the matter. And he provides a short video as well. This short video is what sparked my question. However, the narrator is not a Luciferian and actually seems to be distinguishing it from Gnosticism. Although he never mentions Gnosticism directly, even so there are clearly some overlapping beliefs between Gnosticism and Luciferianism. So, if you have any thoughts, I'd be interested to hear them. And he provides the link of that video. I did watch the video, Invicto, and you are correct. This host for this video does make some parallels between Luciferianism and Gnostic beliefs or ideology. However, I'm going to attempt to show you that they are very different. For us to begin this journey, because it's a very large question, I'm going to be talking about the history first and going into the modern understanding of what Luciferianism is defined as today. The first person I'd like to mention is Dante. So he's the writer from, I believe it was the 12th century, might have been a little bit earlier than that, who wrote the Inferno. And he first sets forth this idea of what hell would be like. He also sets forth taking the name Lucifer from Isaiah and associating it to mean the same as Satan, and that pitchfork image that you see in movies and cartoons and drawings illustrated to you through speech by your pastor, preachers as you grew up through time, with the long tail and the red skin, that all comes from that period. This was the Catholic Church's means of attempting to scare people to follow their dogma. They made this concept of the devil or Satan in the Bible into a creature who was a fire and brimstone. So, what better way to do this than use the word Lucifer? Because Lucifer means in Latin the light bearer or the bringer of light. And it's named after the planet Venus. And I talked about this in one of the previous videos a while back. Venus is the planet that has the audacity to rise before the sun, and thus, because of its pride of rising prior to the sun, who is to be the sun king or the holy astrotheological planet, it then would be the first to fall in the evening sky, falling of the pride. The word Lucifer is merely a title. It is not a name. It has in fact been mistransliterated through time to mean Satan, when in fact Lucifer is a title. And in fact even the word Satan is not an actual entity, but rather a attribute, meaning adversary. This is by adversarial forces, so that one can see whether or not you will be able to withstand the fire. As that saying goes, put it through fire to test it. If it's really gold, then it's pure. So this is all metaphorical, it's mythology, it's lure, symbolic, and it has become twisted in a way to become literal. The word Lucifer now, in modern times, for the vast majority of at least Christians, and even outside of that, even among people that don't follow the Judean religions, think when they hear the word Lucifer, they think of Satan instantly, and they have this picture, illustrative being with the red skin and the tail and the pitchfork and the horns, and he's overseeing hell. When again, the Bible never suggests that's who Lucifer is. It was using it as a title to describe Nebuchadnezzar II in Isaiah 14. Lucifer is the King James Version rendering of the Hebrew word in Isaiah 14:12. This word, transliterated Hallel or Halel, occurs once in the Hebrew Bible. So you see, it only occurs once, and yet somehow it's been transliterated to mean Satan, when that's not what Isaiah intended when he wrote that. And we're talking about the Old Testament. And according to the King James-based Strong's Concordance, means shining one, light bearer. The Septuagint renders in Greek as Theos phosphorus. And we know that the planet Venus is covered in phosphorus and sulfur. And when it's covered in that way, it gives off a light because of that reason. And this is where we get Lucifer, the carrier of sulfur, or the emanator of light, that mineral or that substance that emanates light because of its nature. A name literally bringer of dawn for the morning star. The word Lucifer is taken from the Latin Vulgate, which translates as Lucifer, meaning the morning star, the planet Venus, or as an adjective, light bringer. And then even going further, Christ himself is referred to that planet Venus, the morning, also known as the morning star. He calls himself the morning star in Revelations. This is merely a title. Christ is saying he is preceding what's to come. So Venus is preceding the sun. So Venus first comes, and it tells us that then will follow the sun in the morning. And the sun goes down, and then Venus falls and must follow the sun because of its pride it rose, and thus it must fall because of its pride. And the reason here is because all glory must be given to Yahweh. Yahweh is the individual or the being that brings light to everyone. And yet this king, Nebuchadnezzar II, was prideful. And it describes in Isaiah why he is prideful. And that takes us to a little write-up I found that describes this a little more succinctly. It says in the King James Version, once in Isaiah 14:12, however, this is a mistranslation of the Hebrew and a misliteration rather than translation of the Latin word Lucifer in the Latin Vulgate of Isaiah 14:12. Christianity was influenced with the name more by fictional novels such as Dante's Inferno and Milton's Paradise Lost, both which embody the name Lucifer as sobriquet for Satan, meaning a nickname for Satan. Isaiah 14:4 tells us that Isaiah 14 is a parable about the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, for his haughtiness against God. The Latin word Lucifer is found many other times in the Latin Vulgate translation of the Hebrew Tanakh, Old Testament, and a few times in the New Testament. Yet these instances are never translated into English as Lucifer. One example is Revelations that I just talked about. When Christ refers to himself as the morning star, they don't then say that Christ refers to himself as Lucifer, because that is merely a translation of a Hebrew understanding into a Greek understanding of that Latin word, Lucifer. And you can say morning star, you can say Lucifer, but essentially you're meaning the same thing. Or you can also say the light bearer, because Venus, the planet, is the first to bear light. It is not the actual light itself, it's bearing the light, and then comes the sun, who is the actual cause of light, you see. So this is what we have. Now that we have that understanding behind us of what this word Lucifer really means, it's a title, not a name. Why is this important? This is important because when we talk about Luciferianism, what we're really talking about, we're talking about a concept, not worshiping Satan or an actual entity. In older history, no one would call themselves Luciferians, but today, with free speech and so forth and so on, people, free expression, now form the new church of Luciferianism. And we'll get into that in just a bit here. But first, let's go back into history and look at some of the claims made by people. And you mentioned in your question in the comment about some of these entities or groups, organizations, secret groups that were accused of being worshippers of Lucifer or Satan. One of those being the Knights Templar. Now, the Knights Templar was a poor fellow soldiers of Christ. So they made it very clear that they were following after Christ, not Lucifer. And they were from the Temple of Solomon. So whatever esoteric knowledge they were seeking was a new rising up of an ancient Hebrew mysticism. Now, Gnostics from the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic text, as well as here at the FGCC, we do not follow after the Temple of Solomon. We don't seek Hebrew mysticism. That is somewhat watered down understanding of the Kabbalah. But the point to make about the Knights Templar is their number one goal was the worship of Christ as their understanding of Christ as poor fellow soldiers of Christ. They really did this initially as in order to help poor people and also to guard their understanding of ancient secrets or texts, primarily the Old Testament around the Temple of Solomon. Also known as the Order of Solomon's Temple, the Knights Templar, or simply as Templars, were a Catholic military order organized in 1139, and they also were part of the impetus for the Crusades. The order was founded in 1119 and was active until 1312. So you see already how they were part of influencing, having to be part of the church to influence society. Kings and queens and all of the noblemen they would essentially lobby with, if you will, and would influence them toward their ends, whatever they understood about the Old Testament and Christ, and much similar to the early Sanhedrin that believed Christ would come with glory with the sword. So the Knights Templar picked up that same understanding of Scripture in the Old Testament and who the Messiah is and was to be. This is what the Knights Templar did. Now, of course, along the way they were killed, and some people say that they were killed because they held Gnostic secrets. There's nothing in any of the writings of the Knights Templar that suggests they were Gnostics. In fact, they reverenced the Old Testament God and its followers, David and Solomon, so forth and so on, in order which among the wealthiest and most powerful became a favored charity throughout Christendom and grew rapidly in membership and power. They were prominent in Christian finance, so they used money essentially as their means of having influence in the kingdom and France, and essentially they were closely tied with the Crusades when the Holy Land was lost and support for the order faded. Essentially, once people began to become less interested in trying to get back the Holy Land, and this is what led to the Crusades and the great battles between the Muslims and the Christians, it was trying to get back the Holy Land, something that we're doing even today, as Israel is part of trying to figure out what to do with a two-nation state, which there really is no two-nation, but what they call the occupation or the settlements. We have that ongoing struggle that's been going on for thousands of years. So that's what you need to understand. Rumors about the Templars' secret initiation ceremony created distrust, and this was likely due to the established Catholic Church and the established monarchy of the time being intimidated by the growing numbers and power and financial prowess of the Knights Templars, and so they then would castigate them and find a way to dismantle them and destroy them. Essentially, that's what you have. And so then they were eventually either completely wiped out or had to go completely underground. And from this point, it's not clear where they are. But to answer your question about whether the Knights Templar consider themselves as Luciferians, there's nothing in their writings or historically to show that. Now, from a Gnostic perspective, we would say that people that follow after the Old Testament God is not a Luciferian, because again, this is a title, the light bearer, but rather is following after the demiurge, which has nothing to do with Lucifer. This is a completely different, two different entities. Well, in fact, one is not an entity at all. It's a concept, a title. With the demiurge is an actual entity. He's the one responsible for creating us humans in the flesh form. Now, the next one you brought up is the Freemasons, and this one is an organization that traces their origins to the local fraternities of stonemasons, which from the end of the 14th century regulated the qualification of stonemasons, the interaction with authorities and clients. The degree of Freemasonry retained the three grades of medieval craft guilds, those of apprentice, journeyman, and fellow, and master mason. These are the degrees offered by the craft Freemasonry. So a lot of people are really scared when we think about secret organization or secret knowledge. It is often that when you try to break away from at that time, the Catholic Church or any established Judean religion, that there would be persecution, ostracizing people, as well as oftentimes leading to even death. So it makes sense that they would want to go in secret. But in so becoming a secret order, they would then set up rituals to make sure that you were honoring that secret order. People would then view that suspiciously. And this was the same case, as I said earlier, about the Templars, and now the same with the Freemasons. Furthermore, it doesn't help that your symbol is cryptic when you see the compass and the square as well as the letter G in the middle, which Freemasonry would claim means geometry. Others will say as you go up the rank it means God. Freemasons don't claim that they are Luciferians. What they do, however, claim is that every member professes belief in a supreme being. That's what is the only requirement. And that supreme being doesn't need to be Satan, doesn't need to be Jehovah, it doesn't need to be Allah. It just needs to be the belief in a supreme being, because they believe that there is a grand architect of the universe, and this is by which they root all of their logic and their systems from. So this is the way they set up their lodges and their orders and how they go about the different ranks of the different fellow craft and fellowships. Now, anybody on the outside would want to disparage that and want to break it down and call it satanic and ultimately Luciferian. So again, in modern times, Luciferianism has been equated to Satanism, which they're really very two different things. Even if we want to study a little research, we'll find that Satanism is the actual worship of Satan, and is considered often a black brotherhood, whereas Luciferianism is not even related to Satanism. Now, it can be. There is a group of Luciferians called Theistic Luciferians, and they give you the liberty to make your Theo, or your God, Satan, if that's what you wish. But you can also choose that God to be Jehovah, for example. Essentially, to answer your question about Freemasons, again, they don't claim to be associated with Luciferianism. And even if they did, they would be referring to a concept, a title, not an actual entity that they're worshiping. Now, this is from the outside looking in, so I can't tell you if you join the Freemasons and you go through the ritualistic steps and secrets get revealed to you, that they won't then reveal to you that they are in fact worshiping Lucifer, however misguided that understanding of what Lucifer means. However, almost everything that I've heard and read and seen regarding the accusations about Freemasons and Knights Templars being Luciferian, almost 9 times out of 10 come from the outside. Now, the next one is the Illuminati. It's founded after the Bavarian Illuminati, and the Illuminati comes from the word enlightened. And this is where you see each one of these schools are interested in knowledge. So that's where you will probably be inclined to consider, are they Gnostic then? So what we have to understand when we talk about Gnosis and secret knowledge, we're talking about two different things. Gnosis does not mean secret knowledge. Now that is how many people have twisted it to mean in modern times. That when we talk about Gnosis, people think instantly secret knowledge. It's not secret knowledge. What Gnosis is, it is realization. It's the moment, it's the epiphany of the truth being revealed to you. And everybody has access to it. In fact, Gnostics want to share it with everyone. Now, the only reason why early on Gnostics were secret is because it would come with a price. And even Christ himself said there are certain things that people weren't ready to hear because he knew his time was yet. And the same thing in the early church. They knew that it was wise to withhold certain information, not because it was similar to the Illuminati or the Freemasons and the Templars that had this knowledge as a series of rituals and steps that you had to aspire toward. Gnosticism, there's no such system of order and dogma. Gnosticism is free to everyone. It's everywhere. It's constantly there to continually bring truth, is what Christ calls it. So this thing called the Illuminati, I would say, is a little more influential in modern times because of the two people, one being Adam Weishaupt, who was the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, and then another man by the name of Albert Pike. Now, both of these gentlemen, again, very much believed in Jewish mysticism, astrology, and things like this, and this carried on to people like Aleister Crowley, less so Alice Bailey. She was more interested in esoteric and secret knowledge, not so much mysticism per se. And then it was carried on to modern-day Luciferians and modern-day Freemasons and Illuminati members. But this group I would pay attention to a little more is because they are part of being alleged to conspire to control world affairs by masterminding events and planning agents in government and corporation in order to gain political power, influence, and establish a new world order. There is no hiding the fact that both the Freemasons and the Illuminati are made up of a fellowship, and that fellowship is a brotherhood, and the brotherhood is part of shaping society. That's what Masonry does. It's the building blocks of society. The Illuminati and the Freemasons are part of a brotherhood that go about to influence society behind the scenes. And it's no secret that the vast majority of politicians are part of one or the other group. Former President Bush was a Skull and Bones member, as was his rivalry at the time in 2004, John Kerry, and I believe some 40 out of 45 members or presidents were members of the Freemasons or the Illuminati. So this is significant in that they do believe in using knowledge, esoteric esoteric knowledge to benefit their outcomes, whatever those outcomes that they set forth. But understand that initially the Illuminati is a name given to several groups, both real and fictitious. Historically, the name usually refers to Bavarian Illuminati, an Enlightenment-era secret society found in 1776. The society's goals were to oppose superstition, religious influence over public life, obscurantism, and abuses of state power. So again, they were trying to balance out power. There were no real checks and balance until such time you had the founding of this nation, where you had the three branches of government. You only had the monarchy, and so there was no one to balance that. And so this is why these secret groups met, because it was considered treason to go up against that, and so you would be beheaded. And today, the Freemasons carry on that tradition, meeting in secret, but they have grown into a very influential organization that predominates throughout the world. But ultimately, they were to be purveyors of justice and purveyors of helping to build society in a just and fair way, in a measured way. That's why they use the square and compass and use geometry, meaning the sciences, essentially, to guide them toward their goals or outcomes. This is what you have. Now, as to whether or not they worship Satan, again, it's all speculation, and often is that the existing church, as well as the political structure, whether it be a monarchy or be the political structure of today, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, uses different means by which they are going to frame their opponent. Today it's called the deep state. Before it was called the Illuminati. Prior to that it was called the Freemasons. Prior to that it was the Templars. So forth and so on. On it goes throughout time. This is used to try to establish and maintain control, whatever the controlling body happens to be. Throughout most of Western history, it's been Orthodox Christianity and monarchy, until more recently we've had, over the past 200 years or so, a more what we call democracy, or republic really. People will argue it's actually more a republic than a democracy. So anyway, the point here being is, if the Illuminati and Freemason have any control whatsoever, it's because they have, through time, grown their ranks and been able to earn power and control and be able to influence existing structures and become part of world affairs and coordinating. And some people call that conspiring or conspiracy. And in a way, perhaps it is. Just like any entity, you have factions that may go against each other, and some that are not so good, and others that may be more benevolent in their causes. But to say that they're ultimately, throughout time, related to Lucifer, again, which is just a title, not an actual entity, there is no evidence of that coming from them, at least. Now, secondly, as we said, their association to Gnosticism is only that the early Gnostics guarded the teachings of Christ in the Gnostic text, because they knew that if it were left out, then it would be destroyed, as well as their own lives would potentially be destroyed or even taken. So this is what the Gnostics did. The second thing they may hold in common, both of these various groups in Gnosticism, or Gnostics, early Gnostics, are interested in edifying themselves or illuminating themselves. Now, we as Gnostics believe the illumination comes from the monad, the Mother Father, God, and the Aeon, Christ, Sophia. It doesn't come from men. It doesn't come from secret knowledge being handed down from one man to the next through some rituals and rites of passage. This is not what the early Gnostics practiced, and nor do we here at FGCC. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out that is different between Freemasons, Illuminati, and the Knights Templar, not only is it that they are more inclined to follow the Old Testament God, which you know that Gnostics do not do that, but also most of these groups are known as pantheistic. We talked about this in the Watts video I did a couple weeks ago, but I'll just cover that very briefly here again. Pantheism, which Illuminatists, the Freemasons, and the Templars are more likely to be defined as their dualist, is the belief that everything composes an all-encompassing immanent God, or the universe, is identical with divinity. These pantheists believe that whatever their esoteric knowledge is coming from this universe, and there's nothing outside of this universe, that this universe is God, and there's a Godhead, and it is immanent, and we are part of its body. And so we get all knowledge from that God, which is different from Gnosticism, who is more likely to be defined as pantheism, where there's the monad or the pleroma, which is outside of this universe, and all gnosis and wisdom comes from that realm. All things were emanated from that realm. All spiritual things, all things that are true, comes from that realm. And we do live in this realm as well, called the Konoma, which is pantheistic world that pantheists believe God is and part of. And that universe is corrupt, but it also has good in it, because the divine is posited into the nature of this realm. You see, it pervades this realm. It is not this actual realm. It is in this realm, but it is not this realm. Pantheists will say that God is this realm, you see, and we find knowledge in this realm, truth in this realm, and they follow after that. So they follow astrology, they follow all of those magic and rituals and those type of materialistic approaches, whereas a Gnostic will derobe themselves of all of those machinations. They don't need seagulls and circles and candles and rituals and magic. These are not things that Gnostics need, because they don't rely on those outside forces. They rely on the internal truth that's within, you see, that emanates and pervades everything. This is the difference. Then you have the Orthodox Christian, which we consider a dualist or a monist. Well, the dualist would say that God is outside this realm, but this realm has no God in it, for it's corrupt, and God has abandoned it and has even cursed it, and it will be replaced someday with a new earth and new heaven. This is what the Orthodox Christian will say. But Gnostics will say, no, God is everywhere, and truth is everywhere, telling us of truth. It has often been that the Orthodox Christian through time has been leery and suspicious of institutions of education, illumination. And so it makes sense that these institutions would want to go in secret, because they would be ostracized, they would be belittled, they would be exiled, they would be excommunicated, they would be ridiculed in society, and even not only excommunicated, but often again crucified or killed. So this is what we have. Now, again, going back to Luciferianism, you can see that it has nothing to do with anything that we've talked about thus far. Lucifer, as originally mentioned in Isaiah, only refers to, it's a kind of adjective or title referring to a being that is somewhat rebellious, somewhat lofty and prideful, and some has the audacity to rise above or rise before the sun, you see. And then because of it, it then must fall first in its pride. This is what you have. It's, again, astral theology in action. This really is the truest transliteration of this word, Lucifer. Now, however, in modern times, people have taken that word and they've taken the attribute of that word, and they've used it to signify their understanding of their paradigm of belief. And we've got the modern Luciferians, and they break up mainly into two groups, one being the Theistic Luciferians. Prior to that, I just wanted to briefly mention Aleister Crowley. He relished in shaking the religious organizations at the time that he was alive, and he was alive between 1875 to 1947. And he wrote extensively. He even went so far as sometimes calling himself the Beast. He relished in, and so he founded his own religion called Thelema. And again, this was founded in esoteric knowledge from Jewish mysticism as well as some Eastern thought, borrowed from Hinduism and Buddhism along with paganism, and he formulated his own religion. And he essentially said that humanity was free to do whatever it will, and that would be all the law. That's what's called the Thelema. This is more paganistic than it is Luciferian or Satanic, although in behavior he often would want to incite trouble, at least instigate. He was an instigator, if you will, because his goal was to throw a wrench into the established religion. Something in him sensed that there was something about the established religion order that was toxic, and so he went about to throw a wrench in it. That's really what he was doing. So his image was much larger than his bite, really, if you look at it. But he wrote extensively in many different books. There are even today organizations founded off the Thelema, such as the Ordo Templi Orientis, called OTO, and there are rising branches throughout the world regarding this, essentially after the Order of Thelema or Aleister Crowley. Their essential goal is to raise the old ones, or Cthulhu, to bring back the old days when we were freed from the Christian church and all the Judean religions. And so this is what Alice Crowley wanted to achieve. But if you want to call that satanic, that is certainly fine, but he did believe in experimentation through drugs and even sexual rituals of magic and so forth, but he was not one that was for violence, and he was not one for sacrificing animals and all those kinds of activities that often attributed to Satanists. And even today, Satanists will tell you that they don't do that as well, although there are some more extreme groups that do sometimes bite off bats' heads and things like that, or drink blood, things like that. So it's a very difficult topic to have to take in, because there's so many branches and so many thoughts. But again, this isn't what Gnosticism is. Gnosticism isn't about looking for esoteric knowledge. Gnosticism is having truth revealed to you from inward outwardly and in life itself that is telling you all the answers. The tree of life is around you. It's the Kabbalistic tree of life, you see. It's the Christ. It's the Sophia. And all the answers are there. You don't need to carry with you anything. You don't need to have a magical ring. You don't need to have rituals on the floor or seagulls and practice astrology. And now, having said that, these things are good to understand and know, as they help you to better understand yourself. All mediums can give you self-reflection, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, the Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita, or it's the Confucianism, or if you want to read memoirs, ancient memoirs, or the Book of Law, you want to read the Enoch texts, the Hermetic texts, as well as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Those are all great. They can tell you a lot about maybe where humanity derived from, our history. But in those there are lures, there are mythologies that all speak to us in some way. And in so doing, we come to potentially understand ourselves more. And thus, we open up more to Gnosis being revealed to us. But again, in Gnosticism, we say that all Gnosticism, all Gnosis, all truth, all wisdom is available to us to the degree at which we are lined up to truth itself in our own word and behavior and living of life, you see. This is the way it goes. So with experience comes wisdom. Let's go ahead and move from Aleister Crowley and let's talk about the modern day Luciferians. So I already talked about the branch of Luciferianism that is theistic, and there's a website available. It's called the Theistic Luciferianism, and it just says Luciferianism has no specific dogma to follow. The deities our follower believes in, morals, forms of worship, and about everything else are up to that specific follower. Again, even the modern day theistic Luciferian will say that you can essentially create your own belief system as long as you follow after the tenets of the Luciferian doctrine, which essentially they have a number of tenets. Among those are Lucifer is considered a role model, if you will. They look up to the Lucifer concept. Now, Lucifer isn't the actual god they worship. Now, though there are some within Luciferianism, theistic Luciferianism, that will call their god Lucifer, and that's fine. But not every Luciferian theist is going to worship Lucifer. They may choose whatever god they will. So it says here, Luciferianism is not about worshiping an all-evil devil from Christian faith. The theistic Luciferians who follow gods choose from their own, based on what they actually believe. The names may be similar, Satan, Beelzebub, Abaddon, but they are not the main slaughtering deities of Christian faith. Also, keep in mind that for Gnostics, we don't follow Demiurge or Lucifer or Satan. We follow the true Father. Well, Christ aptly calls the true Father the monad, the mother father. That's what we follow. And even then, we don't worship that emanator. We reverence it, we recognize it, but we don't worship it. That's the main thing. So what does this Lucifer entity represent for Luciferians? Essentially, he represents, or it represents, that being that seeks after illumination. That movie Prometheus, for example, the light bearer, the one that brings the fire or the knowledge to man and then is persecuted for it. So they look at Lucifer somewhat as a persecuted, wrongfully persecuted being when he brought knowledge to man. And there are different people within Luciferianism. Some will say it was an alien that brought the knowledge and went against the prime directive. You look through the Star Trek lens. Others will say, no, it was actual Lucifer. It was an actual god, so forth and so on. And he rebelled naturally. So you can see there's some similarity between Gnostics and how they view the tree of life, the tree of knowledge. of good and evil and our rightful access to it. So Luciferians will say it's a good thing to have access to knowledge, but they don't specifically talk about Genesis. In fact, they don't really follow the Bible at all. Whereas here, we are a Christian doctrine. We are actual Christian entity here at the FGCC. So we do follow, we do read the text, not only from a Gnostic perspective, but from a canonical perspective about Genesis and the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the demiurge and Jehovah and the true mother, father, and the Christ and the Jesus. So Luciferians don't believe in Jesus at all. So to say Gnostics are Luciferian speaks of ignorance. There's a massive gap between the two. We only share that we both seek knowledge. So then you could say that going to college is Luciferian or Gnostic if you wanted to try to make that kind of parallel. You can see how ridiculous that sounds. So then for the Luciferians of the New Church, which is founded by Michael Ford, and there's a great video where he covers some of the basic ideology of Luciferianism that you might want to look at on YouTube. And he also covers on his website, he has about 12,000 subscribers, the 11 principles or the 11 tenets that the Luciferians follow, and the modern Luciferians of the New Church. And essentially, again, they don't ascribe to a God, or they're neither for or against a God. What they do, however, believe in is our belief in a Lucifer, or rather it be an entity or a concept or an archetype, influences us as human beings. And therefore, because so many people parochially believe in this concept, whether it be real or imagined, it has impact on us. So Michael would say that that impact is a good one, because Lucifer goes up against ignorance. He goes up against not questioning things and just going along with what the pastors and the churches say and whatever the authority says. He says that that's not good. So Luciferianism, that entity, that what it represents, is what they are essentially following. Not the actual Lucifer, who some people call Satan, which again is just a title, but in modern time, through different books that have been written, like Dante's Inferno and Paradise Lost, you see that the early Catholic Church went about to create cartoony configurations of these concepts of what's the adversary or the Satan or the divider, the devil, or Lucifer, the light bearer or bringer, the prideful one. These are all, again, just titles or concepts to describe different entities or events that are happening, or personifications onto different individuals in the Bible. But the church has tried to make it into an actual entity, you see, so that we have a type of fear goat or an entity that they can use to fear people into submitting to their dogma. Essentially, that's what you have. And so Michael is taking that archetype. He's essentially using it to help dismantle and destroy that mechanism, that poisonous, toxic mechanism. That's what Luciferianism. So he calls it essentially a church of liberation from dogma and those tactics, mechanizations of fear and loathing and control. So this is what he asks you to do, so that you use Luciferianism to enlighten yourself. His website and his YouTube channel has a lot of information on how they go about to achieve that liberation. He uses what's called the black flame within all of us. Now that sounds similar to what we call gnosis, right? Or the gnosis within. But really it's a very different thing. Again, he's more of if he doesn't necessarily believe in a God, you could call him agnostic, humanist, secularist. But he doesn't not believe in a God either. He just simply knows that these different belief systems have power, and he wants to take those entities of power and use them to good benefit or good outcomes. That's what his ultimate goal is, and to liberate people from bondage to dogmas and toxic religions and so forth, and institutions and so forth and so on. So it essentially is really a church of empowerment. But again, if you could think of him in terms of a monist, pantheist, or panentheist, he would be a pantheist, because he believes that all truth, all goodness can be derived from this universe, the Kanoma, this realm, this matrix. So that's what you have. Whereas Gnostics, again, are not pantheists. We are panentheists. We believe that all truth derives from the pleroma and the true mother father that is outside of this realm, but yet permeates everything in the self-same time. So it's within all of us. Right, so hopefully that clarifies for you once and for all that no, the early Gnostic Church and the first Gnostic Church of Christ has nothing to do with Luciferianism, nor Satanism. And hopefully that clarifies for you what is the difference between Luciferianism and Gnosticism, and Freemasonry, so forth and so on. Now, when we talk about Satanism, what we're referring to is bodies that follow after the five-pointed star, or the pentagram. Now, I don't know a lot about Satanism, but suffice it to say that some actually follow after that entity in the Bible called Satan, and follow after dark magic, and believe that it's okay to use magic, so long as you know to use the rituals. Others are not so inclined. They're a little more moderate in their views, and it's more about being adversary to the establishment in the order that they would consider to be toxic. That's what you have, really what Satanism is. So that's why some people even confuse Satanism with the modern Luciferians, because Luciferians are, even though they ultimately are there to empower people, their face is not to be an adversary to the established church, but rather to transform people. And as a result, the established church will then lose power. So it's more indirect, where Satanists will be more direct in that approach. Now I'm talking on a very general level, and if anyone that's listening is a Luciferian or a Satanist, feel free to add or take away from what I've said. I am not the expert. I'm not a Satanist. I'm not a Luciferian. So I'm giving you my own research and my understanding of these words and how they differ from Gnosticism. Now, having said that, I know people use the word Gnosticism in a very loose way outside of Gnosticism to mean just esoteric knowledge of any kind. Whereas within Gnosticism, we do not believe it's esoteric knowledge, but it is knowledge given to everyone. But Gnostics sometimes had to go in secret because they had to protect their lives and their texts. And that's the reason. Not that the texts themselves are meant to be secret, but we had to guard those texts in secret to prevent them from being destroyed, and our own personal lives from being destroyed. That's the difference. Having said all that, now let's go ahead and move into, and I'm only going to read probably about 5-10 minutes of our next section for this video. And I know that we took up the vast majority of video number 4 talking about Luciferianism and Gnosticism and how they differ, but I think it's very important question. So thank you for that question, Invicto. And again, feel free to provide a question if you have it, and I'll do what I can to answer it in the upcoming videos. Alright, so the next section is called Eve Bears Children, and we're taking up from where we left off, where mankind is left into great distraction, into a life of toil, when he was cursed out of the garden, and the serpent or the seraphim were also cursed, so that human beings might be occupied by worldly affairs, and we became corporal beings and corporation beings, and we became distracted with war and mayhem and divide and conquer techniques ever since, and might have the opportunity, and thus they might not have the opportunity to being devoted to coming to know the gnosis, or their true self within, the Holy Spirit within. Alright, so this section is called Eve Bears Children. Now, afterwards she bore Cain. This is after she comes to know her husband, Adam, and some will say that perhaps it was even Yeldabaoth, and I believe in Secret Book of John it does hint at that Yeldabaoth perhaps is the actual father of Cain and Abel. Now, after she bore Cain their son, and Cain cultivated the land, thereupon he knew his wife, again becoming pregnant. So this writer is suggesting it was Adam. She bore Abel, and Abel was a herdsman of sheep. Now, Abel was the one that was offering blood sacrifices, the lamb, to God. And now God here is referring to the Lord God. It's not referring to the monad, the true mother father. Abel was a herdsman of sheep. Cain brought in from the crops of his field, but Abel brought in an offering from among his lambs. So you can see instantly the demiurge is delighted in animal sacrifice. So any kind of blood spilling as an offering to the Jehovah God was considered a good thing. God looked upon the votive offerings of Abel, but he did not accept the votive offerings of Cain. And when we talk about votive, we're talking about offering that's a type of pledge to the God. And fleshly Cain pursued Abel his brother. And we know the rest of the story where Cain kills Abel. God said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" Now again, you notice how Jehovah, or the demiurge, or this Lord God in the Old Testament, will ask a lot of rhetorical questions. Now either he's just rhetorically asking them, he just really doesn't know. So this indicates perhaps he's not omnipresent or omnipotent. And so Cain answers and says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And so he's sort of learning from this God, right? He then asks a rhetorical question in return. God says to Cain, "Listen, the voice of your brother's blood is crying up to me. Now you can see that the Lord God here, Jehovah, is not all bad. He does understand some degree of justice. After all, he is the God of good and evil. He's not just a God of evil. You have sinned with your mouth. So in other words, you're telling me a lie. You're hiding the truth. You have sinned with your mouth. It will return to you. Anyone who kills Cain will let loose 7 vengeances. So this is where Cain says, well, you're going to send me off, but if someone finds me, what's going to prevent them from killing me once they hear this? Well, a lot of things get revealed in that verse in the Genesis, does it not? For one, he's going off to the land of Nod, and he's concerned that someone else is going to kill him. So this tells you already that outside of the family of Adam and Eve, there are clearly other human beings. Okay, that's the first thing. Secondly, stories must get around. Otherwise, Cain wouldn't be so concerned. He could just take off and go thousands of miles and never hear anything. No one would hear anything about him. Who's Cain that people would want to hear about him? Well, because third, it tells you that this family had influence. Otherwise, Cain wouldn't be so concerned. This is what we can speculate. Anyone who kills Cain will let loose 7 vengeances. So in other words, Jehovah God has an invested interest in Cain. So he wants to protect him, despite what Cain did. And you will exist groaning and trembling upon the earth. But he still has a sense of justice. So he knows he can't just let Cain get away with killing whoever he wants. So he wants to put forth some type of justice here. And yet the 10 Commandments says not to kill anyone. And so clearly Cain broke this commandment. And Adam knew his partner Eve, so she knew Eve again. And she became pregnant and bore Seth to Adam. And she said, I have borne another man through God in place of Abel. Now this is very significant because here Eve is making a distinction between her former 2 sons, Cain and Abel, who she believed was in the spirit of Yahweh. Here she's saying, I have borne a man through God. And here it's lowercase God because the true mother-father was never capital G. It was always that secret quiet God. So she doesn't make emphasis on this God, right? It's very quiet. It's the knowing within her. It's the gnosis in place of Abel. Again, Eve became pregnant and bore Norea. Now this is the first account you've heard of Seth or Norea because in the canonical text, Seth isn't mentioned so much. And then Norea is the first you've heard, right? This doesn't occur in the canonical text. So she becomes a very important figure in the remaining of this book, and we're going to talk about that in our next video. But it says, and she said, he has produced for me a virgin as an assistance for many generations of human beings. Wow, that's very significant. So in other words, Norea is someone who knows gnosis. It isn't that she's a virgin in that she's never had intercourse, because that would be ridiculous that she would mention that as though a baby's born not being a virgin. In fact, what she's talking about is spiritually a virgin, meaning, in other words, she's pure. She's close to gnosis as you're going to get. And so she gets it. And she is produced for me a virgin. He has produced for me a virgin as an assistance for many generations of human beings. So she is going to be very influential. She's going to carry gnosis for humanity. And it's going to be through Norea and Seth, as you'll see as we continue through the Gnostic text. She is the virgin whom the forces did not defile. The forces here are referring to the rulers, the Archons, and the demiurge. Meaning, in other words, she bore Norea in secret, again suggesting that Jehovah is not omnipresent. Then humankind began to multiply and improve. And that's where we end this section for this video. We'll pick up on the next section when we talk about the flood and visitation by one of the Aeons. All right, with that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.